Welcome to another episode of Your Spiritual Journey. It's great to have you with us today. Our guest today is Rick Nowlin, or is it Nowlin?
It's Nowlin.
Nowlin, a Pittsburgh-based musician who formerly served as the longtime jazz critic for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. He's been a practicing evangelical Christian since 1979 and is active in Allegheny Center Alliance Church, especially in its music ministry. Rick will share his transformation from a deeply troubled child to the man he has become due to the grace of God through Jesus Christ. More than that, he has also become an advocate for racial reconciliation, not only in society, but in the church as well. So without further ado, Rick, it's great to have you with us this morning.
Thanks for having me, Bob.
And as we usually do on this podcast, we'll just start with letting you ramble on about your spiritual journey from childhood till the present day.
It's funny because I'm sure with most of your guests, they all have their different stories, and mine is probably as unique as they come. Okay. I actually had always grown up in some kind of church, some kind of, how do I say, ecclesiastical situation. Okay. And when I was 10, as I've been in the 5th grade, I ended up in a Christian academy. And the irony is that my father was always somewhat critical of religion for whatever reason. He had left the church at 21. And that I don't really know what the whole situation is since he's gone now. Yeah. And he was also a very angry man. He blew up at me one time about something. And one of the things that he talked about was in his tirades, it was like Martin Luther King, Christian. He said they killed him. And being a little rebellious, as a lot of kids are in that day, it says, well, maybe I ought to check this guy out. So when I started to check out Dr. King, got some child-appropriate material on him, that is when my eyes started to open to what I believe to be the truth of the Christian faith.
Sounds like it's exactly what your father didn't want you to do. and he instigated it for you.
Yeah, there's just some irony in that. And when I started reading about him, and I started comparing that to the things I was learning in not only the school, but in the church that it was connected to, and so the two were related. I put 2 and 2 together, and that's when I realized where Dr. King's true power came from.
Okay.
And I wish to say that anger, unfortunately, had translated down to me by that point. But the people who were around me at that time, especially the adults, and I'm not sure what to attribute that to except to the grace of God, they did not respond in kind. And eventually, I began to soften. It didn't happen right away, but it took a while when that started to change in my life. And I would say about 8 years later, when when the situation happened when my parents' marriage was about to fall apart, and their marriage was never all that to begin with. And so one day in This was the day before the school picnic in Wilkinsburg, which is, I graduated from Wilkinsburg High School that year. My dad had told my brother and me that Mom had threatened to leave. I found out years later that's not quite what she said, but at that point it was, did I really want that in my life? Did I want my wife leaving me because I was that big of a jerk? And it was the next day at the school picnic in Kennywood Park that I, shall we say, received Christ as Lord and Savior.
At Kennywood Park.
Kennywood Park.
Now there's, I've been to Kennywood many times,
yes.
So can you describe that experience?
It was a matter of, for me, thinking, did I want this life? Did I want a life where that I didn't see God in that anywhere? Did I want my life leaving me because I was a jerk? Or did I want to maintain some kind of integrity in my life? Those were the choices for me in those days. And it was at that point where, shall we say, for the purpose of your audience, that is when I adopted evangelical Christianity for myself.
So it sounds like Kennywood had nothing to do with it. It's just that was where it happened.
It was just, yes, that's right.
Yeah,
It was just a place. It wasn't anything that the place did. It was just the place, the time, the date, what have you. None of that was really irrelevant. It was just, I remember it because of the situation. That one.
Okay, it wasn't because a roller coaster scared the hell out of
No, not at all.
All right. Okay. So this transformation, as you describe it, what was it that triggered it? You said you didn't want to be a jerk. What made you think you were a jerk?
Well, as I said, I was an angry person in my own right. I'd taken on some of my dad's bitterness toward the world in general, and perhaps the white race in particular. Because, of course, anybody understands that we do live in a racist society,
right? And
that rubbed off on me quite a bit. But the irony was that everything that I knew, most of the people that I knew were white. So I figured, I'm being told a tale here.
Okay.
And I was not allowing that. And I said, I had not been giving these people a chance because I saw the color of their skin and was told not to trust them or whatever. But the way these folks actually treated me, I remember either they're sincere or they're doing one heck of a con job.
Okay.
So ultimately, over the course of many years, you realize these people are sincere. They may not understand what I was going through, but they did not judge me, or they did not hold it against me, or what have you. So that was key to understanding that this was. Perhaps some of them had gone through similar things themselves. Because, see, one of the things about the Christian faith that people don't understand, because of the power and authority it's had in American society, people don't realize that it is not something that you're born into. You may be taught it as a child, but it's something that folks adopt for themselves at a particular time in life.
Right. So at that point, when you made that decision, then it's like, what happens next? Did you join a church? Did you explore different denominations, or how did you end up?
I was already in a church, although it wasn't that great at the time, and about 5 years, about 3-4 years after that, I ended up in a much different church that was more amenable to not so much what I needed, though I did need things, but it was a place where I could get back to. And I stayed there for 14 years. I need to say that I started going here when my parents' marriage did break up.
Okay.
And there was a lot of trauma behind that. Also, at this point, I had basically flunked out of the University of Pittsburgh pursuing the wrong career. So I was really bereft of, my life was pretty much gone as I knew it. And I had trouble finding a job. So there was a part of me that was really completely out of kilter with what I needed at the time. And in this particular church, and more accurately, it was a campus ministry at this church, where people really began to rally around me to support me and all the other things that I would need it. And that is where I began to grow.
So what denomination was that church?
It was actually Shadyside Presbyterian.
Okay.
I don't mind mentioning the churches. It was a place where I felt safe for the first time in my life. I felt I could grow. I could contribute. I was an usher for most of the time that I was at the church. But also then I really received a group of friends. Many of them have become friends for life. They were really behind me, and within 2 years, I was a really different person.
Okay. So what happens next?
Well, I graduated, so to speak, from that fellowship because I put it that way because I still wasn't in school, and I bounced around for a few things. Later, after I left that campus ministry, I became involved with the singles ministry at the Alliance Church that I mentioned because most of the young adults in the church, even at that time, were already married, and I didn't have a peer group there. So I split my energy between going to Shadyside on Sundays and going to ACAC singles on Fridays. And then after that, because of another situation, I started going to ACAC full time in 1998, and I'm there today.
Okay. All right. So music is a big part of your background, and you haven't even mentioned that yet. So how does that fit into this whole scenario?
Well, part of that is one of the things about my dad. He was also a musician. He was a long-time bass player, jazz bass player in the Pittsburgh area for many years, although he had stopped playing after he had a stroke in the late 1980s.
Okay.
And I kind of inherited that. I took piano for 5 years. I started playing the saxophone in 8th grade, and I still do that today, even though I've dropped it to attend college. I knew I'd pick it up someday again. And when I started going to ACAC, I noticed that it had an orchestra. And I saw in the bulletin when I was going there, I said, "Oh, they need orchestra players." I think I want to do that. So this is my second week there visiting the church when I knew I was going to be here. So normally I found out there was normally a 3-month waiting period to join the orchestra, although I joined right away because I was already part of the singles ministry. And I bring that up in the context is because it was after I started playing there, that whole lot of things started opening up. I ran to a guy on the street at a previous church who operated a jam session in East Liberty at Buffalo Blues. Started doing that, started getting around the scene. And next thing I know, I'm into it. I joined my first band in 2001, and through that, the lead trumpeter from that band decided to form his own 17-piece big band, which I'm in today. And not only am I in the band, I started writing for it a few years later. So I've become a full-fledged big band arranger.
Okay.
And I actually started writing music for real after my parents split. I was writing songs about, so I would say, the human condition, about it and how they were related to my understanding of God through Jesus Christ. Kind of like what you ever read the Psalms. A lot of that stuff is in there too. And that's when my creative spirit started to flow. Mm-hmm. And the interesting thing is, in the 90s, I went back to school, finished with flying colors. I was a journalism student at the University of Pittsburgh, and got hired on by the Post-Gazette before I graduated in 97. And I was approached to interview Al Jarreau for the Post-Gazette because somebody told him that I knew something about jazz. And that's how I ended up with that beat.
Well, what a great start for an interview.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, and I'm grateful for the opportunities that have been provided for me over the years, not only to do music, but to do it in a context where it's comfortable for me. And as you rightfully said before we talked, is that creativity is part of the spiritual process. And lo and behold, ACAC actually has a creativity group that used to meet regularly before COVID, and I was a regular part of that.
Well, that would make sense with your music background,
mm-hmm.
And your writing.
Yes.
So that's a pretty big deal, at least to me, who, as my wife says, can't sing a note. I'm not only not a musician, I can't sing either. Mm-hmm. So, in your thoughts about your journey and the part that music plays in that,
mm-hmm.
Do you have a spiritual sense? Sometimes when you're playing, or either by yourself or with a group.
I actually do. As mentioned, I do play in church on a regular basis, although not as much as I had been when I started there. And I'm recognizing that that my talent is, to quote Rush Limbaugh, on loan from God, and also to be used for His purposes. But I believe that to be more than simply in a worship setting. The thing about us Christians is that we take Him wherever we go. And one of the things that I do on an annual basis, I've been doing this for about a decade or so, I perform in the pit for the spring musical at Penn Trafford High School. Mm-hmm. And I remember the first year I did this, I remember looking at my instruments and thinking to myself, thank you, Lord, that I get to do this. Yeah, there's rehearsal involved, and especially Tech Week, where we go through the entire show several times. But I remember saying, yes, I'm blessed to be able to do this. Okay. When I go to a big band rehearsal and we play some of my material, and this is once again I'm thankful. I get to do this. Back in 2018, I was involved in a Jazz Composers Concert at the University of Pittsburgh. That's a long, involved story, but we played a piece that I had written about over 30 years earlier. It was concerning a relationship with a woman that I had known through the campus ministry at Shadyside. It was basically she was kind of letting me down easy, and I wrote the tune after that. And 25 years later, I arranged it for my big band, and after that, I submitted it to the Jazz Composers Concert. And I remember thinking, as the band played it and I conducted it, I remember thinking, wow, God gave me that to write. It's kind of an out-of-body experience, if you know what I'm talking about. But it was simply that I came up with that.
It's like a different person.
Yeah.
Somebody else did that.
Yeah, and there are things that I've written that have stood the test of time. And yeah, I came up with that. Yeah. And yes, and I'm grateful for that. That I was the vessel that was being used to get all this stuff out there.
Yeah. So now comes the big question.
Okay.
I've already interviewed your wife, Debra Holz.
Mm-hmm.
And from what I understand spiritually, she's over here and you're over here. I mean, you just to put it out there. Mm-hmm. And when she described to me your background, I just thought, how in the world did they ever get together? So I am curious, and I like to ask the questions that probably my audience is curious about. Mm-hmm. How did that happen? Because it certainly wouldn't have been through the singles group at an evangelical church.
Yeah, that would be very far from the truth. We actually met kind of through Facebook because she had known a guy from my high school band.
Oh, okay.
Now, what had happened was she had been a freelance reporter for South Bureau for the Post-Gazette and had to call in stories occasionally. Once in a while, she would get me.
Okay.
And even though I didn't remember her at all, she remembered me and remember how kind I was over the phone and things like that. And so she went on Facebook and saw this guy, Rick Nowlin, Post-Gazette. Is that the guy I talked to all these years? So she sent me a friend request and I accepted it. And it's like, I didn't think anything of it because I usually accept friend requests from people who are friends of friends. So it was okay. unbeknownst to me, that she had really become interested in the way that my mind was, because I was actually a blogger, although not so much anymore. A lot of times on faith and politics and stuff like that. And so she decided that she wanted to meet me. So, and she was dropping hints and not getting anywhere with that. So she put it out there. She said she wanted to meet me. This was in July of 2019. And I said, well, I had this class reunion coming up, since I was 40-year class reunion. I said, well, suppose you don't like me. Why don't we meet before this? So, okay. So we met for a late lunch over at Applebee's in Penn Center. It turned out this is where she lived. And I learned, and then at the end of that time, we talked and we went for a walk in Murrayville Community Park. And then she kissed me. That's when I realized that she had an eye for me. And
a little slow on the uptake, aren't you?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's probably the reason I was still single for all these years. But I was having questions about that, and I've shared this with her a number of times. But I just had this sense, and I told her this is just go with it. And to make a long story short, we ended up together. We did go through the counseling process at my church, because I did want to be married in the church. So we went through that, and we passed with flying colors. And we were married there. And I want to say that we're actually not that far off on a spiritual level, because the way I have experienced the Christian faith, it is so huge and so encompassing that it actually allows for a lot of the things that she believes about such things. It's just she has a problem with Jesus being the way, the truth, and the life. Everything else, because the Christian faith, I believe, is extremely comprehensive about a lot of it, about faith, about life, about philosophy, about all this whole thing. And that was a Christianity that I grew up with. Mm-hmm. I want to say that I'm part of the quote-unquote the Reformed school. Yeah. This Reformed theology has always been encompassing about all these things. With, in fact, one Reformed pastor in South Africa mentions there is not 1 inch of life that is not claimed by Jesus Christ. So everything is out there. So even your philosophies from other faiths, most of it can be found in Christianity. Most of it can be found in the Bible. In fact, I'm sure there are many of your listeners who are attended 12-step Alcoholics Anonymous. That comes from the Bible. Actually, comes from the Wesleyan revival of the late 19th century. So yeah, it's so encompassing and so comprehensive that there isn't a whole lot that we disagree on. At least that's how I see it.
Yeah, that's interesting that, a couple of things that you said there. Like just yesterday, I was interviewing someone who really had his life turned around by AA. Uh-huh. And he's been doing that for 38 years, and he just swears by it that's the basis of his faith. Mm-hmm. That's what sort of saved his life and mm-hmm. keeps him going.
Yeah. And I have participated in program off and on for a number of years myself, but that came from my understanding of the scriptures originally. So when I started going, I plugged right in. Yeah. So I got it.
Felt like home.
It felt like home.
Yeah.
And in fact, I have always considered that being involved in a program, it has been a real. It has added tremendously to what I've already believed, because one of the things that I wanted to do was deepen my walk with God. And part of that is to get as much of the junk of my life out of it as possible. And the 12-step program helped me to do that in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty amazing how long that's been around and how solid it is still in our culture and in our communities.
Yes, it's been about 80 years.
Yeah. Okay, I'm keeping an eye on the time because that's something that I need to do.
Right.
So the for lack of a better word, the vibe that I get from you is that at this point in your life, you're pretty happy, you're feeling healthy, and life is good.
Yes, I think it is, and Deb has a lot to do with that, obviously, because I had always wanted to be married. Well, not always, but it was something that I've been trying to do for about 15 years before I met her. And in the culture which I grew up in, it was a situation where marriage was heavily pushed, and to my knowledge, it still is, because a lot of times in Christian media, it's marriage and family is really a big deal, and I know I wasn't ready then, but it was something that, and this came about after the collapse of another relationship that I'd had, a 2-year relationship that I should not have been in, that ended up falling apart. About a year and a half after that class, I realized I really do want to be married. But to do that, and this is one thing that a lot of people didn't understand, but I did, you have to make the preparations. And I started reading books about it, interviewing a couple of people about it, treating women the way I feel they should be treated. We actually had a Sunday school class on it at my church. I actually started going to dances, like partner dances, where I had to forced to learn how to relate to women on a one-to-one level, even if it's only for about 5 minutes at a time. So it was something that I truly wanted, but at the same time, I knew not to force things, because one thing that I didn't want to do was run people off, and I had done that occasionally.
Yeah.
So when Deb came along, and at the time, I was really confused about so here's a girl who's actually really smitten with me. I think, I had questions of my life, but like I said, something said, just go with it. And what I've learned, of course, today being Valentine's Day, is that you can't sustain a marriage on just passion. You have to have all the underlying things, such as trust, respect, commitment, and a willingness to forgive, and a whole lot of other things that And we don't do this perfectly, but I think we've come a pretty long way in doing these things just to sustain a marriage. And on top of that, one of the things that my Christian faith obliges me to do is to put her first, is to be her servant. And that was hard for her at first because she asked you to maybe go get coffee, and I do that. Well, you do this, I do that. Whatever needs to be done. Sometimes I forget, but like I said, nobody's perfect. But it's one of the things that I do, as I feel that my job is to be the chief servant in the home, and I like to think that I'm doing pretty well in that respect.
Yeah. Well, given Deb's history and background, and we talked at length at that during our interview, you helped save her life, and she has so much respect for you and your intelligence. That's something that she really focused on. That I don't think you have any worries in that marriage, for sure.
No, I don't think I do. I think there's a normal insecurities. It's like the old the Ray Parker Jr. song says, "Take out some insurance," and I do that on a regular basis because I never really enjoyed being single. I mean, I did a lot of the things. I went to dances. I played a lot of music and stuff like that, and it was. I was okay with that part of my life. I accepted it for what it was, because it was a time. But since knowing Deb, that has changed. I haven't been going to dances. There was one that I used to go to on a regular basis that I was going to even after we were married, that I've recently stopped. Yeah. Because, and it really had nothing to do with her. But we go to hear live music a lot. A lot of times I'm participating in that, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah. Well, we're about out of time, and what I always ask my guests to do at this point is to give our audience some words of wisdom, or at least the final thoughts that you might like to leave with them before we sign off.
Yes, I'm glad. Yeah, I'm glad you asked me that. The important thing for me as a Christian is ultimately the Christian faith is about redemption and reconciliation. A lot of people have this idea, and I believe this to be woefully inadequate, that it's about avoiding eternal torment. It's really not about that. It's understanding that I believe that God has provided a way to reconcile the whole creation to himself through the cross of Jesus Christ. And all that means that people can be reconciled to each other. That to me is the bottom line, and that to me is what we call the good news, better known as the gospel. Right. It's been portrayed as a negative thing, avoid consequences. I think folks get it wrong. I think all the positive things that can come about when all these things are put together the way they're supposed to be. And that's always been my goal. That's been my goal for, especially when it comes to, frankly, just racist society that we live in, to get all that changed and reconciled and redeemed so that we can all live in the world that we want.
So it sounds like you're definitely steeped in the New Testament and not so much the Old.
Oh, actually, the Old talks about that a lot. Because if you actually read the New Testament with the footnotes, all the references in the New Testament are to the Old Testament. That was always God's design, but it was often missed for a number of reasons. That's why he ended up having to renew things. Okay. It was always his design, but people being who they are, they screw up, they miss the intent, they miss what God was trying to do. So basically, the New Testament came across because people did not cooperate in the first time. So yeah, but a lot of that stuff actually was in the Old Testament, but they missed it. And if you look at the Old Testament, especially in Genesis, there's a whole lot of bad stuff going on. A whole lot of bad stuff. And also, people miss the point that the reason you had these laws in the Old Testament, a lot of times are arcane, and some of them are frankly archaic today, but because God was trying to do something differently with ancient Israel that ancient Israel didn't get.
Yeah.
And now he's doing it again with people that known these days as Christians. Originally, they were called followers of the way.
Right.
Christian in those days was actually kind of an insult.
We are out of time.
Okay.
This has been very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate your coming, and audience, as I always do, just to leave you with a little homework. Consider what you've heard today. Take away what resonates with you, and you can just discard the rest. But we hope that this has been helpful to each and every one of you in some way or another. Until next time, this has been your spiritual journey.